Welcome to the How to Succeed podcast, the show that helps you get to the top and stay there. This is How to Succeed at Understanding Emotional Intelligence. The following podcast is copyrighted by Sandler Systems, LLC, and protected by U.S. copyright laws. Sandler is the worldwide leader in sales, management, and customer service training. You can subscribe to this podcast anywhere you're listening to it right now, and check out our additional resources at sandler.com. I'm your host, Mike Montague, Director of Community Engagement at Sandler, and my guest this week is a author, a founder of the Masters of Business Leadership program and podcast. His name is Phil Johnson, and we're going to talk with him about how to succeed at understanding emotional intelligence. Phil, welcome to the podcast. Tell us a little bit about your work in emotional intelligence and what does that mean? How can we use it for business? What are we talking about today?
Mike, thanks. Great question, and it's a pleasure to be on your show. So thank you again. Here's the first takeaway I want your listeners to have, and that's that the development of our emotional intelligence guarantees career, personal, and organizational success. And I want to underline the word guarantees. The development of our emotional intelligence creates a massive impact on our results. And more organizations are hiring, developing, and promoting emotional intelligence. As a matter of fact, if you want, I can give you an example of a company who's currently doing over $1 trillion a year in revenue, or $100 billion a year in revenue. And their primary hiring focus is emotional intelligence.
So I love that. Let's start with some of the attitudes here. So I believe that it's important. I think being able to read yourself and others and control your emotions, but also leverage them in certain situations for yourself and others, especially in sales, is extremely important. David Sandler, our founder himself, said, people make decisions intellectually or emotionally. They only justify those decisions intellectually. And I think that's really key for salespeople, but it can also get really messy. And it's one of those things that's hard to understand. Can you tell us a little bit more about maybe what people usually mess up and what you mean by emotional intelligence?
Yeah. When you develop your emotional intelligence, that leads to a greater awareness and caring. That leads to becoming a trusted advisor to the people you're seeking to serve. And the biggest pieces of business almost always go to the trusted advisor. If somebody doesn't want to do business with you, if they don't trust you, they'll find a way not to do business with you, even if you have the best price and the best technology. Conversely, if they want to do business with you, if they trust you, if they see your success and their success as connected, they'll find a way to do business with you, even if you don't have the best pricing or the best technology. So the development of emotional intelligence, here's another takeaway for your audience. The development of your emotional intelligence enables you to out-care your competition. The development of your emotional intelligence enables you to out-care your competition. And in my career, I've helped organizations generate over $1.5 billion in revenue, primarily focused on the development of their emotional intelligence. So this stuff works like hell.
Well, I like that for sure. And I want to get into the how a little bit here. So you mentioned hiring on emotional intelligence. That sounds like something difficult to do. What are some of the actions companies put into place when they want to do something like that?
The more emotionally intelligent you are, the more you're able to see it in other people. The less emotionally intelligent you are, the less you're able to spot it in other people. So a lot of the interview process, so if the people that are interviewing you are emotionally intelligent, it becomes very easy to spot it in the person being interviewed or the lack of it. Um, so does that help at all?
Yeah, I think so. It still sounds a little squishy to me, though. I agree with you. I think it's one of those things that you can
Well,
tell in salespeople when you meet and interact with them if they're aware of their own emotions and those of others and can adapt their behavior to that situation. To me, that's what really is valuable here. Also for leaders, there are some leaders who just are what they are and they have a very firm, vision, and they're going to it. But I wouldn't call that necessarily emotionally intelligent type of leader. Others
let me
are
give you
seeing
some
the people
examples.
around them and inspiring them, right?
Let me give you some examples of. I often work with hiring managers and HR folks. Here's some questions that can give you some clues into a person's level of emotional intelligence.
Yeah, there
Um,
you go.
why is this role of interest to you? I'll rattle some of these off. Why is this role of interest to you? How will it help you to achieve what you want? What do you consider to be a few of your strengths? When's the last time you were embarrassed? What happened? How did you handle it? What activities energize you? How good are you at accepting help from others? How good are you at asking for help? What makes you angry? What aspect of your work are you passionate about? Is
Mm.
your primary focus on present, future, or past events? So these are just some questions that can give you some indication of a person's current level of emotional intelligence.
Yeah, that's interesting. I love those emotional words in there. What are you passionate about? What embarrasses you? What makes you angry? Those are leaning into if they can identify those situations and pay attention to them. That helps a lot for me
Yep.
to get an understanding of how you would have a conversation like that in hiring. Um, Now I'm wondering, you also said about the business results. Could you describe a couple of situations of when this comes up and why companies make more money or have those results that you mentioned? Is it specifically in the people they surround them with, like we've been talking about, or is it in business dealings? I like that you mentioned the trust and the trusted advisor. I think you're right. That's huge when people create an environment where they're attracting other people, including coworkers or clients. I think that's when companies get really interesting. But what do you think?
Because of the accelerating rate of global change, let me back up just a minute and then I'll answer your question. Because of the accelerating rate of global change, we have a 500 million year old brain that doesn't like change. Um, the development of our emotional intelligence is critical, and I'll give you an example why, and then I'll get into
Yeah.
how this increases revenue. Um, that's a part of our old lizard brain um, called the amygdala that has been trying to keep us safe and alive by making sure we never leave the safety of our comfort zone, by making sure we never leave the safety of our cave. And if we do, it secretes a hormone into our bloodstream called cortisol. And that causes the executive center of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, to shut off. And we go into what psychologists refer to as an amygdala hijack. We go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. Some people unconsciously lash out. Some people run away. Some people freeze like a deer in the headlights. And when that happens in conflict situation, people die. And when it happens in business or personal situations, relationships die. We burn trust. So, as an analogy, if you think of your amygdala as a very frightened 4-year-old child, the development of our emotional intelligence acts like a big brother or a big sister to quiet that amygdala response down and better enable us to feel the fear and anxiety that is always triggered in us when we leave our comfort zone. whenever there's innovation or change, but it allows us to feel that anxiety and move through it towards what it is we're trying to achieve, as opposed to allowing that anxiety to keep us trapped in our comfort zones. So that's
Yeah.
one of the reasons why more and more organizations are developing emotional intelligence, because um, with the accelerating rate of global change, that's going to trigger higher and higher levels of drama, chaos, and conflict. Um, and we really need to be developing our emotional intelligence to be able to move through that anxiety, as opposed to allowing that anxiety to control us. Now, because of the accelerating rate of change, there's something called the trust economy that's developed, and that's growing much faster than the traditional economy. It's currently estimated at over $10 trillion a year. So more and more people are relying on their network of trusted advisors, people they trust, to make decisions about what they should be doing. Because they can't keep up with the accelerating rate of change, they have to rely on people they trust. So that the development of your emotional intelligence, your trustability, is the most valuable asset you have. And the way you develop trust is by developing your emotional intelligence. It causes you to lower your walls. You become less resistive, less judgmental, less attached to outcome. And people pick up on that. Let me explain just a little more about that. We
Yeah.
have these specialized brain cells in our prefrontal cortex that brain scientists call mirror neurons. Because we've grown up in tribes, in herds, we've had to develop the ability to sense whether somebody's trying to help us or eat us.
Mhm.
That's why when you walk into a room, you can sense the energy in a room. When you have a conversation with somebody, you can sense whether they're trying to serve you or take advantage of you. So I call these mirror neurons bullshit meters. You can't fake being real. You can't fake being authentic. Um, So the development of our emotional intelligence enables us to demonstrate our trustability, which creates greater trusted advisor relationships, which leads to more revenue.
Yeah, I love that. I think you're right on. What it also, just to tie those kind of 2 points together, is trust is what allows people to drop those defensive walls during the change or during meeting a stranger or other types of things that happen in business, right? Whenever they're stressed out and they have a problem that they're facing, trust is what allows them to move forward and make a decision or take a next step, because
Yes.
they are not in that fight, flight, or freeze mode anymore. And it's what allows them to drop those walls, right?
Let me add one more. Yes, that's correct. Let me add one more comment in there. It's actually involves energy physics. And what I mean by that is that if you have your walls down, the other person has to lower theirs.
Mm.
It's physics. So how you behave, how you show up in the moment has a huge impact on whether or not the other person has their walls up or down. It's actually called emotional contagion. So by focusing on you lowering your walls, your presence automatically creates a higher level of engagement with the other person.
I love that. And it actually reminds me of another Sandler rule from our founder, where he said, hard selling is good for one thing, and that's hard pushback from your prospect.
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying is the opposite is also true there, that if you're welcoming and you're building, approaching somebody with trust, they have to do the same thing as well. And I think that makes a ton of sense. But I wanted to circle back here in our last bucket technique. You mentioned developing your emotional intelligence, and I feel like there are some things, and some people may call them soft skills. I just call them some things maybe are more difficult to develop than others? I know you've successfully helped, hundreds of people develop it. So I'm sure you have an answer here, but I could see where somebody listening to this goes, man, people either get it or they don't. Kind of like you mentioned earlier, when you're interviewing somebody for a job, that either they're self-aware, and when somebody's not self-aware, it's really hard to get them to recognize where they are with their emotional intelligence. How do you recommend going about that? If somebody goes, man, I could really get better at identifying other people's emotion, maybe that's where they see their gap, is that I don't seem to be reading people correctly. Where do you start, and how do you develop this?
Great question. The place you start is the same place for everybody. And the starting point is, what do you want? See, when somebody tells you what they want, they're also telling you what they don't have. And the bigger the gap between where they are versus where they want to be, the more motivated they are to look for a solution to close that gap. So you have to have an emotional connection to a desired result that's stronger than the fear that's going to get generated in you as you start to move towards that desired result. So that's always the starting point. You have to have the motivation, or what I call the fuel for the journey, to do the work, to do the emotional labor that the development of our emotional intelligence requires.
That's awesome. Now, I had one more, which might help clarify this for us, which is, how do you see this different from the other intelligences that we've talked about, like IQ and other things that people feel like are ingrained in them? How would you say emotional intelligence is different?
I love your question. Great question. Let me give you a numeric analogy of the difference between intellectual intelligence and emotional intelligence. So our ability to do intellectual work is genetic. If you have a high IQ, your parents had a high IQ, their parents had a high IQ, and you inherited those genes. Think of IQ as somebody giving you $10,000 a day for 31 days. So at the end of 31 days, you've got $310,000. Now think of emotional intelligence as a penny that doubles in value every day for 31 days. Day 1, you've got a penny. Day 2, you've got 2 pennies. Day 31, you've got $10.7 million. Day 40, you've got over 5 billion. Day 50, you've got over 5 trillion. See, the thing about emotional intelligence is that everybody can develop their emotional intelligence. Not everybody can have 160 IQ, but anybody can develop their emotional intelligence, and the impact on their results far exceeds the effect of intellectual intelligence. As a matter of fact, UC Berkeley did a 40-year study comparing IQ with EQ, and they determined that EQ was 400% more important in determining success than IQ. And quite frankly, that's over 40 years. And quite frankly, I think that number's low. I think EQ has a much higher impact on results than IQ.
Yeah, I have found that to be true in my life and in career, is just there, especially in things like sales and leadership, when you're trying to put things together. You can get a really good job with intelligence. If you want to be entrepreneurial or control your career, that's more of the emotional intelligence part, in my opinion.
You ever heard the saying, people are hired for their IQ and experience and fired for a lack of emotional intelligence?
No, but I would go with that too, for sure. It's been a really great conversation. I want to get to know you a little bit better here, Phil. So tell me, at this point in your career, how do you define success?
Serving others by helping them to bet on themselves and develop their emotional intelligence.
I like that. Was there a biggest failure or lesson learned in your career that you're most proud of, or was the most difficult hurdle you had to get over in order to develop your emotional intelligence or define success?
Absolutely. Many. I was born with dyslexia.
Mm.
I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 5. And I'm 68 years old. I was born on December 1st, 1953. And back in those days, there was no such thing as dyslexia, ADD, or ADHD. I started working when I was 9 years old, pulling copper out of the back of factory dumpsters and selling it for 5 cents a pound. That was my allowance. I went on and got a BCom and an MBA and studied electrical engineering and spent 20 years as an executive in the semiconductor industry, traveling 60,000 miles per year throughout North America and the Pacific Rim. All of that required a lot of emotional labor and leaving my comfort zone throughout my life. And that work, that emotional labor, has given me the insights that helps me to serve the executives and organizations that I've been serving all over the world for the last 22 years.
Wow, that's interesting. I'm a little dyslexic myself, so I can relate to that story. And it's funny, fifth grade was one of my toughest challenges until I got up into college and had another emotional intelligence learning experience there. But I think that's amazing. That's great. I appreciate you sharing. Last one here. Do you have a favorite quote, motto, or mantra?
Yeah, but I have a few of them. But the one I'd like to leave your listeners with is an encouragement to bet on themselves by developing their emotional intelligence.
Love that. We're talking with Phil Johnson, founder of the Masters of Business and Leadership program. You can check it out. We got the link in the show notes below or in the comment section, depending on where you are listening to this. If you want to bet on your own success with Phil, you can reach out to him there. There's also a podcast available. You can find over 200 episodes of that podcast he has done for Masters of Business Leadership. And Phil, anything else you would like to share with our audience, or how they can work with you if they are so inclined?
No, I'd be happy. There's a link I think I've given you that to my Zoom calendar. I'd be happy to meet with anybody that would like to carry on the conversation.
Sounds great to me. I appreciate it. And for more information on Sandler, you can check out any of our free resources at sandler.com. Maybe come to a upcoming webinar or free event. And as always, don't forget to click subscribe to this podcast or like if you haven't already. And thank you for listening. Remember, whatever you are, be a good one. The How to Succeed podcast is brought to you by Sandler, the worldwide leader in sales, management, and customer service training with over 200 locations. For more information, visit Sandler.com. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to click subscribe to get notified about future sales and leadership videos from Sandler.
The Sandler Summit returns in 2023. Each new event builds exponentially upon the energy and success of the prior year. The 2022 Sandler Summit event was a huge success for everyone who attended, so don't miss the next one. Buy your tickets to the Sandler Summit at sandler.com/summit.